Ken opened up in a very real and honest way about something that might seem small on the surface but actually carries a much deeper meaning in relationships and in the way people are raised. He spoke about how Trish has an issue with naps and how that has become a topic between them. At first, when you hear the word naps, you might think of something lighthearted, almost silly, like an argument about who's hogging the blanket or leaving dishes in the sink. But when Ken explained the story, it became clear that this issue is not just about naps. It is about upbringing, mindset, pride, and the way beliefs from childhood can affect adulthood and relationships. Ken started by saying that he knows Trish hears him and understands him, but she struggles with letting go of certain ideas because of how she was raised. He shared that Trish is the type of person who has a lot of pride, and because of that pride, she doesn't like to admit when something is difficult for her. Even when she feels scared or stressed about having to face life or handle things on her own, she won't let it show. She holds her ground and stands firm because that's how she was taught to survive. Ken explained that while he understands where she is coming from, he also tries to remind her that sometimes in life, we have to unlearn the things we were taught, especially if those things are no longer helping us grow or live peacefully. This is where the issue of naps comes into the picture. For Trish, naps represent laziness. That's what she was told by her father, who came from a strict military background. In her household growing up, naps were looked at as a sign of weakness or unproductivity. Sleeping too much meant you weren't doing enough with your day. Her dad believed in structure, discipline, and getting up early to get things done. In fact, Ken mentioned that her dad had that military mindset, where resting in the middle of the day wasn't acceptable. On the other hand, Ken grew up hearing some of those same old sayings, like you can't sleep past 9 o'clock if you want to be successful. His grandfather used to say things like that. But as Ken got older, he began to realize that those sayings weren't necessarily true. He pointed out something very important: you need sleep to recover. Without proper rest, the body breaks down. He even said that if you don't get enough sleep over time, it can shorten your life. So, for him, naps are not a sign of laziness, they're a sign of taking care of his body and making sure he can keep going for the long run. Ken emphasized that when he takes a nap, it doesn't mean the bills aren't being paid. It doesn't mean that life is falling apart. He works hard, and if his body tells him he needs rest, he believes he deserves that nap. For him, it's about balance. He explained that his family has a history of long life, with relatives living well into their 90s and even close to 100. He wants to reach that same goal. For Ken, being able to rest when needed is part of the path to health and longevity, but Trish doesn't see it that way. Because of her upbringing, she connects naps with being lazy, unmotivated, or wasting time. So when Ken chooses to take a nap, it bothers her. She gets mad at him, even though, as Ken explained, he doesn't take naps all the time. It's not like he spends every day sleeping away the hours. He said it happens every now and then, and it's a small thing, but for Trish, it becomes bigger than it should be. Ken admitted that sometimes it feels like nitpicking. He said that it's as if Trish is focusing on the smallest details instead of seeing the bigger picture. And that's where his frustration comes in. He feels like naps should not be the kind of issue that causes tension in a relationship, especially when they don't harm anything. He explained that true love means being able to overlook small things. If the love is real, it should be easier to let go of things that don't damage the relationship. For him, taking a nap is not detrimental to their marriage. It's not cheating, it's not lying, it's not disrespect, it's simply rest. This conversation highlights a much larger point about relationships. Many couples face disagreements not because of the actual problem, but because of the history and beliefs behind the problem. In this case, the argument isn't about naps. It's about the belief system that Trish grew up with. For her, naps equal laziness because that's how she was taught. For Ken, naps equal self-care and health because that's how he sees it now as an adult. Neither of them is necessarily wrong. They just come from two different worlds shaped by two different sets of values. Ken brought up the idea of unlearning. This is such a powerful point. He explained that parents and grandparents passed down lessons based on what they believed was best at the time. They were teaching from their own knowledge and experience. But life keeps changing, and not every lesson holds up over time. What worked in the past might not be what works now. For example, in the military or in strict households, discipline meant no naps, no sleeping in, and no rest outside of a tight schedule. But in today's world, we also understand the science of rest and recovery. We know that sleep is necessary for mental health, physical health, and even emotional balance. Ken tries to tell Trish that there's no manual for life. There's no exact rulebook that tells us how to live every day perfectly. Everyone is learning as they go. What you believe today might not be what you believe tomorrow once you gain more knowledge. For Ken, that's growth. He sees it as being flexible enough to change when you learn something new. That's why he wants Trish to unlearn the old belief that naps are bad at the same time. Ken also recognizes that change doesn't come easy. Trish has to work through years of conditioning, years of being told that rest equals laziness. That's not going to disappear overnight. This is where compromise comes into play. Ken was asked whether he and Trish talk about compromising when it comes to naps. For instance, maybe limiting naps or finding a middle ground. Ken explained that he doesn't take many naps anyway, so it's not a huge issue on his part. But he still feels like Trish blows it up into something bigger than it should be. The interesting part is how Ken connects all of this to love. He said that when someone truly loves you, the small things should be easier to move past. It's the big issues, the ones that break trust or cause real harm, that deserve attention. But small things like naps, he feels, shouldn't create conflict. This is a reminder that relationships often fall into trouble when couples allow little disagreements to become mountains instead of molehills. Ken's perspective shows his maturity and his desire to build a long-lasting relationship. He's not brushing off Trish's feelings, but he's also standing firm that something as harmless as a nap shouldn't be a deal-breaker or a source of constant frustration. He wants to make it clear that naps don't stop him from working hard, don't prevent him from being a good partner, and don't hold back their household. In fact, he believes naps are part of what keeps him going strong. When you think about it, this discussion isn't just about naps, it's about traditions, expectations, and learning how to adapt. It's about how couples from different backgrounds merge their lives together and sometimes clash because of the beliefs they bring into the relationship. For Trish, the military-influenced mindset is still strong. For Ken, a more modern and health-conscious mindset makes more sense. The two have to meet in the middle, and that's what relationships are all about, finding common ground even when you disagree. This situation also opens the door for a bigger conversation about pride. Ken mentioned that Trish doesn't like to admit when something is tough for her. She has a lot of pride, and that pride can sometimes block communication. Instead of saying, "I don't like naps because they make me feel uncomfortable based on my upbringing," she reacts with frustration. Pride makes it harder to be vulnerable and explain why something bothers you. And in a marriage, vulnerability is key. Without it, small things can spiral into arguments because the deeper meaning is never addressed. Ken's honesty in this conversation shows that he is willing to talk about uncomfortable topics. He's willing to look at his own habits, defend his choices, and also explain why he sees things differently than his partner. That level of openness is something many couples struggle with, but it's also what keeps relationships alive. By breaking down the nap issue, Ken actually gave insight into how couples can navigate differences of opinion. Step 1 is recognizing where the belief comes from. Step 2 is questioning whether that belief is still useful. Step 3 is having open communication without letting pride take over. Step 4 is remembering that love makes it easier to forgive and let go of the little things. This is not just a story about Ken and Trish. It's a story about every couple who has ever argued about something that, on the surface, seemed small. Whether it's about chores, money habits, sleep schedules, or personal routines, the real issue is often the history and emotions tied to those things. And as Ken pointed out, life doesn't come with a manual. Everyone is learning as they go. The key is being willing to unlearn old patterns and grow together.